So if you've been watching the news this week, there is really only one story that everyone is talking about, and that is the US military operation in Venezuela that saw the Americans bomb the country's capital city and capture President Nicolas Maduro. Now, as you know, this has been an immensely controversial action. Countries around the world have either responded with outright condemnation, outright support, or caution when the US operation is concerned. Now, a lot has been written about it, a lot has been said. Over the last week, I've been thinking about Venezuela and specifically what it means for India and the world. And so this episode of the HT Explainer, I'm going to explain the 4 big takeaways from the whole Venezuela crisis for India. The first big takeaway is that pragmatism is the order of the day in Indian foreign policy. Like I said before, there were really 3 baskets of countries in terms of how they responded to what the US did in Venezuela. Those who condemned the US action, those who supported it, and those who were cautious about what it meant and hedged their responses. Now, India was definitely in that third basket of countries. It released a statement, it talked about its deep concern about what was happening in Venezuela, but it didn't say much else. Now, this has become controversial in India, with some people calling for a much more outspoken policy of criticizing the United States for what it did in Venezuela. But the important thing to recognize is that this is entirely consistent with India's policy. You might remember that in 2022, India did not come out and criticize Russia for invading Ukraine, and it isn't going to do so now when it comes to criticizing America. Mostly, India understands that making public criticism is really only going to humiliate your partners, and it's not going to get you anywhere. It prefers to deal with disagreements behind closed doors, and there, conversations can get pretty frank and pretty brutal. In this case, India has pragmatically calculated its interests. As with Ukraine, Venezuela is not a core interest for India. And Delhi does not see any point in being involved in a problem that is happening literally on the other side of the world. Even if India were to make a heated statement against the Trump administration, it wouldn't achieve much. In fact, it might actually hurt India's national interest because of the ongoing trade negotiations. Now, it wasn't always like this, mind you. In the early years after independence, India did raise its voice on issues that really weren't central to Indian interests. Korea, Japan, the Congo, the Israel-Palestine issue, all of these were examples of India's more idealistic foreign policy. But over the years, India realized that it wasn't really getting any returns for this activist policy. And so, like other countries, India reverted to pragmatism, which is that we get involved when our interests are involved and when we can make a practical difference. Otherwise, we move on. And we saw that pragmatic policy on full display here in Venezuela. The second big takeaway is that India has to reconcile itself to the fact that it is not a big priority for the Trump administration. The India-US relationship is in a bit of a crisis right now, as we all know. There's a 50% tariff, there is the question of Russian oil, the trade deal is still not done, there is the question of Donald Trump's relationship to Pakistan. All of these things are actively hurting the relationship. And one of the problems in solving these tensions is this, that India is not as much of a priority for the Trump administration. You might have caught our video last week where we said that the United States mainly looks at India through the lens of China. So if the United States wants to compete with China, India is the top priority. But if not, what America wants to do with India becomes fuzzy and incoherent. They're not really sure what their India policy is. And that's where we are right now. Donald Trump wants to engage with China and not compete with them. And as such, India's value in America's strategic calculus has gone down. Now, the Venezuela crisis is going to make this problem even worse because in the Trump administration's national security strategy, it said very clearly that the goal of American foreign policy is to dominate the Western Hemisphere and focus on problems much closer to home and not on China and India and other far-flung priorities. And the Venezuela crisis and the Venezuela intervention is a symbol of the fact that Trump is extremely serious about that policy. Now, Greenland, Cuba, Mexico, these are all countries that are coming in for much more pressure from the Trump administration. And if the focus is on dominating the Western Hemisphere, then that means that India and countries like it are just much less of a priority for the Trump administration, and that is going to be a problem. The third takeaway is that international law and the rules-based order have really taken a heavy hit. Now, America has been telling a story over the last couple of years about the difference between itself and Russia and China. Those countries, they say, violate international law, they bully and intimidate other countries, whereas America upholds the rules-based international order. Now, that distinction has pretty much collapsed because of what America has done in Venezuela, and it is going to stay collapsed. Because the 3 most powerful countries in the world that like to project their power abroad are Russia, America, and China. And all 3 countries are animated by the sense of grievance. China feels that it was historically humiliated by Western countries. It is determined to take Taiwan and reshape the Asian balance of power in its favor. Russia wants to challenge the West because it feels it was mistreated by Western countries like America after the Cold War. It has invaded Ukraine. And Donald Trump's America thinks that allies and partners have cheated it, and so on and so forth. And so it has slapped tariffs on the world and behaved in a fairly blatant disregard for international law. And that is a profoundly dangerous thing. India is probably one of the only major powers in the world that is not motivated by this sense of historical grievance. But so long as major world powers like Russia, America, and China are willing to use their powers to invade other countries and violate international law, then we are going to be moving into a much more unstable and profoundly dangerous time in world affairs, particularly for countries like India. Fourth, this whole crisis reveals something very dangerous about where the United States is going. And to understand my point, you have to look at this gentleman, Juan Orlando Hernandez. Now, he used to be the president of Honduras. But in 2024, he was convicted by a United States court of being part of a conspiracy working with drug cartels to smuggle cocaine into the United States. He was sentenced to 45 years in prison. And the interesting thing is that the Trump administration just pardoned this man and set him free. But wait, you ask, isn't the reason that the Trump administration captured the Venezuelan president was that he was supporting drug cartels? Why, yes it is. So why the double standards? And that's where we get into something interesting. It's confusing, but according to the best media reports that we have, President Hernandez is said to have written a letter to Trump praising him and asking for a pardon. Others are also saying that Hernandez is a fellow conservative leader in a Latin American country who Trump wanted to support, and so he pardoned him and set him free. Now, the reason why this is important is because of that letter that Hernandez wrote praising Trump to get his pardon. Leaders around the world have figured out how to deal with Trump. You praise him, you use flattery, you buy lavish gifts for his family, and those who play the game will get rewarded. But those who don't will suffer. To the point where people have begun to call this sort of policy Neo-royalism. As that name suggests, it means that countries like the United States and others around them are no longer ruled by stable laws, institutions, or bureaucracies. They're ruled by a royal clique. In this case, there is President Trump, his immediate family, and his close political allies. They are not interested in international law or helping govern the world as previous American generations of leaders were. Their interest is essentially their own economic benefit. Countries that give them what they want will do well, and those that don't will suffer. Venezuela now has to safeguard its independence by ensuring that America has control over how its oil industry develops. And as you might have guessed, I'm also talking about India and Pakistan. Pakistan knows how to play this new royalist game because that's how its own country is set up. It has secured business deals with family members in Trump's inner circle. It has praised Trump again and again for his role in ending the India-Pakistan conflict. It has also paid lavishly for lobbying groups to access the Trump administration and has also, of course, offered critical minerals to the American administration. India, by contrast, has suffered because it has not played that game. It hasn't praised Trump. It has made clear that it won't change its position on the India-Pakistan ceasefire simply because Trump doesn't like it. And it will not open up sectors of its economy to the Trump administration simply to make it happy. And so the 50% tariff remains. The trade deal between India and the United States remains incomplete. But to be clear, until it plays the game, India is going to find it very hard to deal with the United States under Trump. The Venezuela crisis in so many ways showed us that we are all living in a much more dangerous world today than we were yesterday. And where this ends, no one really knows. And that's what really makes it dangerous. Thanks for watching HT with me, Shashank Mattoo. You can catch our episodes every week.